The luminous Lysandrian embassy towered over the sprawling cityscape of Earth's capital. Its silver walls gleamed beneath the late afternoon sun, a stark contrast to the earthy tones of the human architecture surrounding it. The embassy stood as a symbol of the Lysandrians' elegance and the precision of their culture, a beacon of diplomacy between two very different worlds. Inside its walls, the air was always cool and still perfectly controlled, much like the Lysandrians themselves. Allura moved through the halls of the embassy with the grace of someone who had spent her entire life perfecting her every step, her every movement. Her long, silken robes whispered against the polished floors, the silver embroidery catching the light as she passed beneath the high, arching windows. Her expression was serene, a mask of composure that never faltered. The Lysandrians prided themselves on such discipline and unwavering control over emotion and desire. To display anything other than calm was considered a failure, a breach of the highest order. She was a perfect embodiment of her people's ideals. Every thought, every action was measured, deliberate. There was no room for impulsivity or passion in the life of a Lysandrian diplomat, especially one of her rank. But lately Allura had begun to feel the faintest cracks in her resolve, the smallest tremors beneath the surface of her calm. And the source of this disturbance was a human, a diplomat named Jason. Her first meeting with him had been unremarkable, or so she had thought at the time. A routine diplomatic session, one of many in the long-standing negotiations between Earth and Lysandria. The humans were an emotional species, impulsive, often governed by their feelings rather than logic or duty. Yet they had managed to carve out a place for themselves in the galaxy, forging alliances, expanding their reach. The Lysandrians found them fascinating, albeit in a distant, almost clinical way. They were a curiosity to be studied, not an example to be followed. Jason had been polite enough during that first meeting, his words measured and professional, though his smile, always that disarming smile, had lingered longer than necessary. Allura had dismissed it at the time, thinking nothing of it. But as the weeks passed, and as the negotiations continued, something about him began to gnaw at her. It wasn't his words, nor his arguments, they were often simplistic compared to the intricacies of Lysandrian diplomacy. No, it was something else entirely. It was his warmth. Jason was warm in a way that no Lysandrian could ever be. His presence filled the room like sunlight filtering through a cloudy sky, and Allura had found herself drawn to it, as though some forgotten part of her was craving its heat. He smiled easily, his eyes crinkling at the corners, and when he spoke, his voice carried a sincerity that was foreign to her. It wasn't that Lysandrians were insincere, they simply had no use for the kind of unguarded openness that Jason embodied. And yet, despite herself, Allura had begun to seek him out. At first it was only during official meetings moments when their eyes would meet across the table, and she would feel something stir within her, something she didn't recognize. It was a strange sensation, unsettling and exciting all at once. She convinced herself it was mere curiosity. After all, as a diplomat, it was her duty to understand other cultures, to study their ways. Jason was simply an interesting case study, nothing more. But as the weeks turned into months, her excuses began to wear thin. Allura's hand tightened slightly around the smooth edges of the datapad she carried, her knuckles whitening just for a moment before she willed herself to relax. She was on her way to yet another negotiation session, the latest in a series of talks that seemed to drag on without end. Trade agreements, territorial disputes, cultural exchanges, it was all standard diplomatic fare. But today her thoughts were not on the matters at hand. Today her mind was elsewhere, her focus pulled inexorably toward the man she was about to face once more. She had told herself that today would be different. Today she would regain her control, rebuild the walls that had begun to crack. Jason was a distraction, nothing more. And yet, as she entered the conference room and saw him standing at the far end, laughing softly with one of his aides, she felt that same unfamiliar warmth wash over her. He turned as she entered, his laughter fading but the smile lingering, as it always did. Allura, he greeted her, his tone easy, relaxed. "Good to see you." "Diplomat Jason," she replied, her voice cool and measured, betraying nothing of the storm beneath. She inclined her head in acknowledgement, moving to her seat at the table with practiced grace. She did not return his smile. For the next several hours they discussed trade tariffs and transportation routes, the conversation polite but distant. Allura kept her gaze focused on the datapad before her, meticulously noting every point raised, every counterpoint offered. She had always been good at this, the precision, the control. Her voice was steady, her arguments calculated and logical. And yet, every time Jason spoke, she felt her attention waver, drawn not to his words but to the warmth in his voice, the easy way he carried himself. It was as though he inhabited a different world, one where emotions weren't hidden beneath layers of cold detachment, where laughter wasn't something to be stifled. He was alive, in a way that she had never allowed herself to be. She caught his eyes once, just briefly, and saw something in them, a question, a curiosity. It was as if he could sense her internal struggle, as if he knew the effect he was having on her. For a brief moment, Alora's heart skipped a beat, and she quickly looked away, her composure slipping ever so slightly. When the meeting finally ended, and the other diplomats began to file out of the room, Alora gathered her things with deliberate precision, preparing to leave as well, but as she turned to go, Jason's voice stopped her. "Alora," he said, and she paused, glancing back at him. He stood there, his usual easy smile replaced by something more serious, more intent. "Do you have a moment? I wanted to ask you something." She hesitated. Every instinct told her to say no, to maintain the distance between them, but her curiosity, her growing, dangerous curiosity, compelled her to stay. "Very well," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. Jason gestured toward a small seating area near the window, where the light from Earth's setting sun cast a soft, golden glow. She followed him, sitting on the edge of the couch, her posture straight and formal. He sat across from her, far more relaxed, leaning back slightly as he studied her with those disarming eyes. "I've been meaning to ask," he began, his tone gentle, almost hesitant. "What is it like for you? For the Lysandrians, I mean, to live with such control all the time?" Alora's heart quickened at the question, though she did not show it. This was dangerous ground. She knew she should deflect, steer the conversation back to something safer, something professional. But instead, she found herself answering him. "It is simply the way of things," she said, her voice as steady as she could make it. "We believe that emotions, if left unchecked, can lead to chaos." 2. Irrationality. Jason nodded, though she could see that he didn't fully understand. "But don't you ever feel like, I don't know, like you're missing something? I mean, emotions are part of what makes us human, or Lysandrian, for that matter. Isn't there value in that, in feeling?" Alora's chest tightened, the cracks in her resolve widening just a little more. She had never been asked such a question before, had never even considered it herself. What was it like to feel, truly feel, without restraint? She looked out the window, watching the sun dip lower on the horizon, the sky painted in hues of pink and gold. For a moment she allowed herself to wonder. What would it be like to let go, to laugh freely, to feel the warmth of another without fear of consequence? But then she caught herself, her thoughts rushing back to the cold logic that had governed her life for so long. She turned back to Jason, her expression once more composed. "Our way may be difficult for others to understand," she said carefully, "but it has served us well for centuries. It brings order, peace. Emotional restraint is not a burden, it is a strength. I can't stand anymore, I want you, but we can't be together." Jason studied her for a long moment, his gaze searching hers as though looking for the cracks beneath her polished surface. Then, slowly, he smiled again, but this time it was softer, more understanding. "I see," he said quietly, though she wasn't sure he truly did. They sat in silence for a while, the fading light casting long shadows across the room. Alora felt the weight of his presence, the warmth that seemed to radiate from him even when he was quiet, and in that moment she realized something that sent a chill down her spine. She was no longer in control, not fully. Her heart, her mind, something had shifted, something dangerous. Before she could say anything more, before the tension between them could grow any thicker, she stood abruptly, the movement quick and decisive. "I should go," she said, her voice clipped, betraying just the faintest edge of the turmoil inside her. Jason rose as well, his brow furrowed in concern. "Alora, I didn't mean." "It's fine," she interrupted, turning away before he could see the emotion flickering in her eyes. "Good night, Jason." And without waiting for his reply, she walked swiftly toward the door, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing with thoughts she dared not entertain. As the door slid shut behind her, Alora paused in the quiet hallway, pressing a hand to her chest as if to steady the rapid beat of her heart. She closed her eyes, taking a deep, measured breath. This had to stop. She couldn't afford to let her curiosity, her emotions, lead her down this dangerous path. She was Lysandrian, a diplomat bound by duty and tradition. There was no room in her life for the warmth of a human smile, the spark of desire in his eyes. And yet, despite her resolve, despite the rules that had governed her existence for so long, Allura knew one undeniable truth. Something had changed, and there was no turning back. I can't stand any more, I want you. Allura sat in the solitude of her private quarters, the gentle hum of the Lysandrian embassy's ventilation system the only sound in the stillness. The silver-hued walls shimmered with a soft, ambient light designed to soothe the mind and promote calm. Ordinarily, this serene atmosphere would have been enough to center her, to bring her thoughts back into the cool, controlled precision expected of a diplomat of her stature. But tonight there was no peace to be found within her. She had barely spoken to Jason after the encounter in the conference room earlier. The moment still lingered in her mind, the way his eyes had softened as he questioned her. The warmth in his voice as he spoke of emotions, as though they were treasures to be embraced, rather than dangers to be controlled. It had unsettled her, shaken the very foundation of everything she had been taught since childhood. Her hands rested in her lap perfectly still, yet her mind churned. Why did she feel this way? Why had one human's words pierced the armor of discipline she had worn her entire life? Allura had dealt with humans before Earth had been an important ally for years, but none had ever affected her like this. None had ever stirred these feelings. She rose from her chair abruptly, moving to the large window that overlooked the sprawling city of New Avalon. The city lights stretched out beneath her, a glittering array of human life, so chaotic compared to the orderly cities of Lysandria. But as she looked out over the endless sea of glowing buildings, Allura couldn't help but feel a pull toward it, a strange, inexplicable draw to the vibrant, unpredictable energy of human existence. And to Jason. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime, signaling a message. Allura turned back toward the small communications panel embedded in the wall. It flickered to life, displaying the image of her closest friend and confidante, Lyriel. Her expression, as always, was one of serene composure, her silver eyes gleaming with the cool intelligence typical of their people. Lyriel's voice was smooth, but there was a hint of concern in it. The Council has asked for an update on the negotiations. They are particularly interested in your assessment of the human delegates. Allura's stomach twisted slightly. She knew what Lyriel really meant. The Council, while ostensibly focused on trade and diplomatic ties, was always wary of the influence humans might have on their people, especially those like Jason, who radiated warmth and openness. They would want to know if there was any danger of emotional contamination, of influence that might soften the Lysandrian discipline. And for the first time in her career, Allura found herself unable to give the answer they would want to hear. They proceed as expected, Allura replied, her voice carefully measured. The humans remain eager to solidify agreements on trade routes and resource sharing. Their diplomatic envoy is persistent but professional. Lyriel's eyes narrowed slightly. And the human diplomat, Jason? The Council has heard reports that he is particularly charismatic. Allura's pulse quickened at the mention of his name, though she fought to keep her face impassive. She met Lyriel's gaze steadily, though inside she could feel the tremor of uncertainty. He is, she said slowly, choosing her words with care, persistent, yes, charismatic, certainly, but he is also respectful. I have no concerns about his influence. There was a pause, and for a moment, Allura wondered if Lyriel saw through her carefully constructed facade. Her friend had always been perceptive, attuned to the smallest shifts in behavior, but after a brief silence, Lyriel nodded. Very well. The Council trusts your judgment. They are eager for this alliance to proceed smoothly, but they remind you of the importance of maintaining our integrity. Allura inclined her head, acknowledging the unspoken warning beneath Lyriel's words. The Council's expectations weighed heavily on her, as they always had. But now, for the first time, she felt a rising conflict between those expectations and the strange, burgeoning feelings she could no longer deny. As Lyriel's image flickered out, Allura stood in the quiet of her quarters, her heart heavier than before. The Council was watching, as they always were, and they would not tolerate even the hint of emotional vulnerability. Relationships with humans, romantic or otherwise, were strictly forbidden, and any violation of that rule could lead to dire consequences: exile, disgrace, betrayal of her people. And yet, despite the consequences, Despite the deep-rooted loyalty she felt toward Lysandria, her thoughts returned to Jason. The next day, Alora found herself dreading the diplomatic meeting that awaited her. She knew Jason would be there, and she knew she was no longer capable of suppressing the way his presence affected her. The very thought of seeing him again made her pulse quicken, her carefully maintained composure fraying at the edges. She arrived at the conference room early, hoping to compose herself before the others arrived. The room was empty, the long table set with data pads and documents, and the soft glow of the overhead lights casting a pale hue over everything. Alora stood by the window, gazing out once more at the sprawling city below, willing herself to focus, to regain control. But then, the door slid open with a soft hiss, and she knew without turning that it was him. "Am I too early?" Jason's voice, warm and laced with humor, broke the stillness of the room. She turned slowly, her heart already betraying her by quickening its pace at the sound of his voice. "No," she replied, her voice steady, though her emotions were anything but. "I was simply preparing." Jason smiled, that disarming, sincere smile that always seemed to reach his eyes. He crossed the room to stand beside her, his presence filling the space with an energy that made Alora feel both alive and dangerously vulnerable. "You're always preparing," he said lightly, though there was a seriousness in his gaze as he looked at her. "Do you ever stop and just breathe?" Alora's lips pressed into a thin line. The question was innocent enough, but it struck deeper than he could have known. Breathing, truly allowing herself to feel, to exist in the moment, was something she had never permitted herself to do. For a Lysandrian, emotions were not meant to be indulged. They were meant to be mastered, controlled. Anything less was weakness. "I breathe," she replied coolly, though the edge in her voice was sharper than she intended. Jason's brow furrowed slightly, and for a moment he seemed to study her, as though he could see the cracks forming beneath her carefully constructed exterior. The thought unsettled her, and she turned away, focusing on the cityscape once more. But Jason didn't back down. He stepped closer, his voice lowering slightly, the warmth in it wrapping around her like a soft embrace. "You seem tense. More so than usual. Is something wrong?" Alora clenched her fists at her sides, her mind racing. She could feel the pull between them, the tension that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks now, threatening to break free. She wanted to tell him that everything was fine, that she was in control as she always was. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she said nothing. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. And then, to her surprise, Jason reached out, his hand gently brushing her arm, the warmth of his touch sending a shock through her system. "Alora," he said softly, his voice filled with a quiet intensity, "you don't have to keep everything locked inside." His touch lingered for just a moment, and though it was gentle, it was enough to make Alora's breath catch in her throat. The sensation was intoxicating. No one had ever touched her like this, so softly, so genuinely, as though her emotional walls were something to be dismantled, not feared. She pulled away abruptly, stepping back from him, her heart racing. I can't," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Jason frowned, concern etched in his features. "Can't what?" She shook her head, her composure crumbling faster than she could rebuild it. Us. I can't let it happen." His eyes searched hers, and she saw the hurt there, the confusion. "Alora, No," she interrupted, her voice trembling now. "You don't understand. If I allow myself to feel this, I'll lose everything. My people, my home, my—" Her words broke off, her throat tight with emotion. She had said too much, revealed too much. The walls were crumbling faster now, and she had no way to stop it. But Jason didn't pull away. He stepped closer again, his voice soft and steady. "I don't want you to lose anything, Alora. I just want you to be honest with yourself. With me." His words cut through her defenses like a blade, and for the first time Alora felt the full weight of her emotions pressing down on her. She had spent her entire life denying them, suppressing them, and now, in the face of this human's warmth, she could no longer hold them back. "I don't know how," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know how to feel like this." Jason's expression softened, and his hand reached out once more, this time gently cupping her cheek. The touch was so tender, so unlike anything she had ever known, that it nearly brought her to tears. "You don't have to know," he said softly, "you just have to let it happen." For a long moment, Alora stood frozen, torn between her duty and the overwhelming desire building inside her. She knew what she should do. She should walk away, rebuild the walls around her heart, and return to the safe, controlled life she had always known. But the pull was too strong, the warmth too inviting. And so for the first time in her life, she let go. Her hand reached up, hesitantly at first, but then with more certainty, and she placed it over his. The connection between them sparked like fire, and for a moment, everything else, her people, her duty, the consequences, faded away. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her confession, "but I can't deny it anymore." Jason smiled softly, his eyes filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "We'll figure it out. Together." And in that moment, as the last remnants of her control slipped away, Elora realized that she had crossed a line she could never return from, but for the first time in her life she didn't care. The walls that had once protected her, the rules that had governed her every thought and action, crumbled away like ash in the wind, and in their place she felt something new, something terrifying, yet exhilarating. Freedom. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments and unspoken promises. Alora and Jason began to meet in secret, away from the prying eyes of their colleagues and the ever-watchful gaze of the Lysandrian Council. They would talk for hours, their conversations ranging from the intricacies of intergalactic politics to the simple joys of human life. Elora found herself laughing more in Jason's presence than she had in years, her carefully constructed mask slipping more and more each day. She told herself it was wrong, that she was betraying everything she had ever stood for, but she couldn't stop. The connection between them was too strong, the pull of her emotions too powerful to resist. And Jason, he was always there, always warm, always understanding. He never pushed her, never asked for more than she was willing to give, but in his presence, Alora found herself wanting to give more, to let go completely. But even as their bond deepened, a dark cloud hung over them both. Alora knew it was only a matter of time before their secret was discovered, before the council found out about the forbidden relationship she had allowed herself to fall into. And when that day came, the consequences would be devastating. But for now, in the quiet moments they shared together, Alora let herself forget. She let herself feel. And for the first time in her life, that was enough. Alora's days began to blur together, each one filled with the same duality on the surface. She remained the disciplined Lysandrian diplomat, flawlessly executing her duties, while beneath that perfect veneer, her heart beat to a rhythm she could no longer control. She had never felt so alive, yet so conflicted. Each encounter with Jason felt like a fire burning beneath her skin, a dangerous heat that threatened to consume her entirely. Their relationship, secretive and illicit, grew stronger with each passing day. Every stolen glance, every whispered conversation behind closed doors, deepened the connection between them. But alongside the exhilaration came a shadow of looming danger. Elora knew she was playing a dangerous game, and with each passing moment, the walls around her carefully constructed life felt more fragile. Elora stood in the grand atrium of the Lysandrian embassy, her eyes scanning the room with the practiced composure of a seasoned diplomat. The hall was filled with dignitaries, both human and Lysandrian, all mingling over delicate crystal glasses of wine and the soft murmur of polite conversation. Tonight's gathering was a formal diplomatic event, designed to strengthen ties between Earth and Lysandria, another step in the long, delicate dance of politics. She moved through the crowd with her usual grace, her silver-embroidered robes whispering as she passed. To anyone watching, she was the embodiment of Lysandrian elegance, calm, poised, detached. But inside, her mind was racing, her thoughts consumed by the knowledge that Jason was somewhere in this very room. She spotted him near the far end of the hall, deep in conversation with Senator Hartman, a senior human official. Jason wore a tailored dark suit that set him apart from the flowing robes of the Lysandrians, and yet, as always, he seemed perfectly at ease, laughing at something the senator said. Even from across the room, his presence pulled at her, drawing her like a magnet. The connection between them, though invisible, was undeniable. For a moment, their eyes met across the sea of people. It was brief, so brief that no one else would have noticed, but in that fleeting instant, the weight of their secret pressed against her chest. She could see the same longing in his gaze, the same quiet intensity that had kept them tied to each other despite the impossibility of their situation. A hand on her shoulder broke her reverie, and she turned to find Lyriel standing beside her, her expression serene but her silver eyes sharp with scrutiny. Lyriel had always been perceptive, and lately Elora had sensed a growing suspicion in her friend's gaze. Elora Lyriel greeted her, her voice soft but carrying an edge. "You seem distracted." Elora forced a small smile, keeping her composure as she faced her friend. Merely observing the proceedings, she replied, her voice steady. "There is much to consider tonight." Lyriel's gaze flicked briefly to where Jason stood, now engaged in another conversation with a group of human officials. The humans are certainly enthusiastic in their negotiations, she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Particularly diplomat Jason. He seems to have quite an influence, doesn't he?" Elora's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her face impassive. Jason is an effective diplomat. His methods are unconventional, but he has proven valuable in bridging the gap between our cultures. Lyriel tilted her head, studying Elora with a quiet intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Perhaps," she said softly, her voice carrying a subtle weight, "but we must be careful not to let their influence stray too far. Emotions, as you know, can be distracting." Elora's pulse quickened, her mind racing. Was Lyriel merely speaking in general terms, or had she begun to suspect something more? Had her own emotions betrayed her in ways she hadn't noticed? "I agree," Elora replied, her voice cool and measured. "We must maintain our discipline, as always." Lyriel regarded her for another long moment before nodding slowly. "Indeed. Discipline is what has kept our people strong for centuries. It is our greatest strength." Elora forced herself to meet her friend's gaze steadily, but inside, she felt the weight of those words pressing down on her. Discipline had been her greatest strength, too, until Jason. Now, the very thing that had once defined her was slipping from her grasp, and with it, the foundation of her life was beginning to crack. Later that night, after the formal event had concluded and the halls of the embassy were quiet once more, Elora found herself standing in the shadows of a secluded corridor, waiting. The dim light from the overhead lamps cast long, soft shadows on the walls, and the silence was broken only by the faint hum of the building's systems. Her heart raced as she waited for Jason. This had become their routine, the only way they could be together without fear of discovery. The secrecy, the danger, only heightened the intensity of their connection, and yet, Elora couldn't shake the growing fear that it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. The soft sound of footsteps reached her ears, and a moment later Jason appeared at the end of the corridor. His expression, usually so open and warm, was tense tonight, his eyes dark with concern. As he approached, Elora could feel the energy between them crackling, the pull of their emotions undeniable. "Elora," he said softly as he reached her, his voice laced with urgency, "we can't keep doing this." Her heart tightened at his words, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I'm getting more and more worried that someone's going to find out," Jason went on, his hand brushing hers in the shadows. The brief touch sent a shiver down her spine. "I don't want to put you in danger, and I don't want to put you in danger, and I don't want to ruin everything you've worked for." Elora swallowed hard, her mind torn between her duty and the overwhelming pull of her heart. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "but I can't stay away from you." Jason's expression softened, his hand finding hers more fully now, his fingers intertwining with hers in the darkness. "Neither can I," he said quietly. "But that doesn't change the fact that this could destroy you. I can't let that happen." Elora looked into his eyes, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. He was right, of course. What they were doing, this forbidden relationship, was reckless. If the council found out, she would be exiled, stripped of everything she had ever known. And yet, the thought of losing him, of walking away from the one person who had made her feel truly alive, was unbearable. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice trembling with the emotion she had fought so hard to suppress. "I've never felt this way before, Jason. I don't know how to stop it." Jason's hand tightened around hers, his thumb brushing gently over her skin. "You don't have to stop it," he said softly. "We just have to be careful. We'll find a way to make this work. Together." Elora closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, allowing herself this one moment of vulnerability. She had spent her entire life mastering her emotions, keeping them locked away behind an impenetrable wall of discipline. But with Jason, Those walls had crumbled, and now she was left exposed, raw, and terrified of what might come next. "I can't lose you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You won't," Jason replied, his voice firm yet gentle. "But we have to be smart. The council. They're watching, Allura. They're already suspicious." She nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. Lyriel's earlier warning echoed in her mind, and she realized that Jason was right. The council's eyes were everywhere, and any misstep could spell disaster not just for her, but for both of them. The days that followed were filled with a tension that seemed to permeate every aspect of Allura's life. She and Jason continued their secret meetings, but the danger of discovery was ever present, casting a shadow over every moment they shared. And as much as Allura tried to maintain her composure, she could feel the cracks in her armor widening with each passing day. Her duties at the embassy became more difficult to focus on, her mind constantly wandering to thoughts of Jason. Every time she saw him in a formal setting, surrounded by other diplomats, she had to fight to keep her expression neutral, to hide the storm of emotions raging beneath the surface. But it wasn't just her own composure she had to worry about. Jason, too, was struggling with the secrecy. His usual warmth and openness were now tempered by the weight of the lies they had to maintain, and Allura could see the strain it was placing on him. One evening, after another long day of tense negotiations, Allura found herself alone in the embassy gardens, seeking solace in the quiet of the night. The gardens were one of the few places she could go to clear her mind, the meticulously arranged plants and flowers providing a small sense of peace in a world that was quickly spiraling out of control. But even here, in the stillness of the garden, she could not escape her thoughts. The weight of her secret pressed down on her, suffocating in its intensity. She knew that if the council discovered her relationship with Jason, the consequences would be severe. They would see her as a traitor, a disgrace to everything Lysandria stood for. And yet, despite the fear, despite the danger, she couldn't bring herself to end it. Jason had become a part of her, an inextricable part of her soul, and the thought of walking away from him was more terrifying than the threat of exile. The soft sound of footsteps behind her made her tense, and for a brief moment she feared it was someone from the council. But when she turned, she saw Jason standing there, his expression filled with the same turmoil she felt. "Allura," he said softly, stepping toward her. She didn't speak, but the look in her eyes was enough. Without another word, he crossed the distance between them, pulling her into his arms. The embrace was filled with desperation, with the knowledge that they were walking a dangerous line. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the feel of his arms around her, the warmth of his body against hers. For a long time they stood there in silence, holding each other as though the world around them didn't exist. And in that moment, Allura knew one thing with absolute certainty. She loved him. But even as she clung to that truth, Allura knew that their time was running out. The walls were closing in around them, and soon the fragile illusion they had built would come crashing down. And when it did, there would be no turning back. The sky over New Avalon was painted in soft shades of twilight, the stars just beginning to emerge in the deepening blue. The city buzzed with its usual energy, a blend of human innovation and the structured elegance of Lysandrian influence. Yet within the walls of the Lysandrian embassy, the air felt heavier than usual, as though the impending storm that Allura had feared for so long was finally upon her. Allura stood at the window of her private quarters, watching the city lights flicker on as night descended. Her reflection in the glass revealed the face of someone who had once been the epitome of control, of discipline, but now cracks marred the surface. Dark circles under her silver eyes betrayed sleepless nights, and her usual pristine composure had given way to a tension she could no longer hide. The weight of her secret was crushing her, and with each passing day, it became harder to maintain the mask of the perfect Lysandrian diplomat. Jason's words from the night before echoed in her mind, his voice filled with both love and fear. "We can't keep doing this, Allura. It's only a matter of time before someone finds out." She knew he was right. The council's suspicions were growing, and Lyriel's watchful eyes seemed to follow her everywhere. The delicate balance they had maintained for so long was teetering on the edge of collapse. And yet, despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to end it. The thought of a life without Jason, without the warmth and passion he had awakened in her, was unbearable. A soft chime from the corner of the room pulled her from her thoughts. The door slid open to reveal Lyriel, her expression as serene as always, though her eyes held a hint of something darker. Suspicion? Concern? Alora couldn't quite tell, but the tension between them had grown palpable in recent weeks. Alora Lyriel said, her voice calm but firm, "The Council has requested your presence. There are matters that require your immediate attention." Alora's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to remain composed. What matters, she asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. There are. Concerns, Lyriel replied carefully. Concerns about the ongoing negotiations with Earth, and more specifically, about certain personal relationships that may be influencing your judgment. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Alora's blood ran cold, and for a moment she felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her. She had known this day would come, had feared it for weeks, but now that it was here, she wasn't ready. How could she be? "I see," she said, her voice steady despite the panic rising inside her. "I will meet with the Council immediately." Lyriel nodded, her expression unreadable. "Be cautious, Alora. The Council has little tolerance for indiscretions." With that, she turned and left the room, leaving Alora standing alone in the quiet. For a long moment, Alora stood frozen, her mind racing. The Council knew, or at the very least, they suspected. Her relationship with Jason, once a secret she had guarded so carefully, was now on the verge of being exposed. And when it was, the consequences would be severe. Exile, disgrace, everything she had worked for, everything she had built would be stripped away. But it wasn't just her own future at stake. Jason's career, his life, could be destroyed as well. If the Council deemed him a threat, if they believed he had compromised her in some way, there was no telling what they might do. The thought of him suffering because of her choices was unbearable. Taking a deep breath, Alora steeled herself. She couldn't let this happen. Not to Jason. Not to herself. She had to face the Council and find a way to navigate this treacherous path. But even as she tried to focus on a solution, a dark sense of inevitability loomed over her. The walls were closing in, and there was no escape. The Council chamber was vast and imposing, its silver walls gleaming under the soft light that illuminated the room. The circular layout of the chamber placed the Council of Elders at the center, their seats elevated slightly above the floor, where Alora now stood. They watched her with the cold, detached scrutiny that was their hallmark, their expressions unreadable beneath the layers of stoic discipline. At the head of the Council sat Elder Vorath, his silver eyes piercing as he regarded her from his seat. Vorath was known for his unwavering commitment to Lysandrian tradition, a man whose very presence exuded authority. To defy him, to go against the laws he upheld, was unthinkable. Diplomat Alora Vorath began, his voice low and authoritative. "We have summoned you here today to address certain concerns that have been brought to our attention." Alora bowed her head slightly in deference, though her heart pounded in her chest. "I am at your service, Elder Vorath. Please tell me what concerns the Council." Vorath's gaze never wavered, and the tension in the room grew thicker as he spoke. "It has come to our attention that your interactions with the human diplomat, Jason, have extended beyond the boundaries of professional diplomacy. There are whispers of a personal relationship, one that violates the very tenets of our society." The accusation hit her like a physical blow, though she had been expecting it. Alora kept her expression neutral, her posture straight and formal, but inside she felt as though the ground beneath her was crumbling. "I assure you, Elder Vorath," she began, choosing her words with care, "my relationship with Diplomat Jason has always been in the best interest of Lysandria and its alliance with Earth. Our conversations, our interactions have been focused on the diplomatic goals of our people." Vorath raised an eyebrow, his gaze sharp. "Focused on diplomacy? Or perhaps compromised by emotions?" Alora's pulse quickened, and she could feel the eyes of every Council member on her, scrutinizing her every word, every movement. She had been trained her entire life to remain calm under pressure, to maintain control no matter the situation. But now, in this moment, she could feel that control slipping. Emotions. And Vorath continued, his voice growing colder, "are a dangerous thing, Diplomat Alora. They cloud judgment, they lead to irrationality, to betrayal. The laws of Lysandria are clear personal relationships with outsiders, especially humans, are forbidden for this very reason. To compromise one's duty for the sake of emotion is to betray the very foundation of our society." The weight of his words pressed down on her, suffocating in its intensity. Alora knew there was no point in denying the truth. The council had already made up their minds. They believed her relationship with Jason was a betrayal, a violation of everything they stood for. And there was nothing she could say that would change their minds. But she wouldn't deny her feelings for Jason. Not now, not when they had come so far. I understand the council's concerns, Alora said, her voice calm but firm. But I must ask, does the council not value the progress that has been made in our negotiations with Earth? Diplomat Jason has been instrumental in forging a stronger alliance between our worlds. Our connection, though personal, has only served to strengthen that bond. Vorath's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. You speak of progress, yet you ignore the cost. Your connection, as you call it, is a threat to the very fabric of Lysandrian society. It undermines our discipline, our strength. We cannot allow such a precedent to be set. Elora's heart sank. She had known this would be their response, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. The council would never accept her relationship with Jason. To them, it was more than a violation of the law, it was a threat to their way of life. Diplomat Alora Vorath continued, his voice now laced with finality. You have been a loyal servant of Lysandria for many years. But your recent actions have brought your loyalty into question. The council must act to preserve the integrity of our people. The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. Alora could feel the eyes of the council bearing down on her, waiting for her to respond, to submit. But instead of submitting, something inside her shifted. For so long, she had lived her life according to the rules of Lysandria, adhering to their strict code of discipline, suppressing her emotions in favor of duty. But now, standing before the council, with the threat of exile looming over her, Alora realized that she could no longer live that way. She had tasted what it meant to feel, to truly feel, and she could never go back. Alora Vorath's voice was sharp, as though he had sensed the shift in her. You are hereby ordered to return to Lysandria for formal disciplinary action. You will be stripped of your title, and your relationship with the human diplomat will be severed. If you fail to comply, you will face exile. Elora's breath caught in her throat. This was at the moment she had feared, the moment she knew was inevitable. The life she had built, the future she had once envisioned for herself, was crumbling before her eyes. But instead of fear, she felt something else rise within her. Defiance. She straightened her spine, lifting her chin as she met Vorath's gaze head-on. I refuse. A shocked murmur rippled through the council, and Vorath's expression darkened. You refuse, he repeated, his voice dangerously low. I refuse to give up my relationship with Jason, Alora said, her voice steady and unwavering. I refuse to deny my feelings, to suppress my emotions in the name of duty. I have served Lysandria with loyalty and honor, but I will not deny the truth of who I am. The chamber fell deathly silent, the weight of her words echoing in the vast space. Alora could feel the tension in the air, the disbelief on the faces of the council members. But she stood her ground, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. For the first time in her life, she had chosen her own path. She had defied the council, defied the very rules that had governed her existence for so long. And though the consequences would be severe, she felt a strange sense of freedom wash over her. Very well, Vorath said, his voice cold and final. If you refuse to comply, then you leave us no choice. You are hereby exiled from Lysandria. You will no longer be recognized as one of our people. Your name will be erased from our records, and you will be forbidden from returning to our world. Elora's chest tightened, the full weight of her decision crashing down on her. Exile. The ultimate punishment. She would lose everything: her home, her people, her identity as a Lysandrian. She would be cut off from the only life she had ever known. But she wouldn't lose Jason. And in that moment, that was all that mattered. Thank you, Elder Vorath, Alora said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. I accept your judgment. With that, she turned and walked out of the council chamber, leaving behind the life she had once known and stepping into the unknown future that awaited her. Later that night, as the stars twinkled in the dark sky above New Avalon, Alora stood on the balcony of Jason's apartment, her heart still racing from the events of the day. The cool night air brushed against her skin, but she barely felt it, her mind too consumed by the enormity of what she had just done. She had defied the council. She had given up everything for love. But as she heard the soft footsteps behind her, and Jason's arms wrapped around her from behind, pulling her close. She knew she had made the right choice. "Are you okay?" Jason's voice was gentle, filled with concern. Elora leaned back against him, closing her eyes as she savored the warmth of his embrace. "I'm not sure," she admitted, "but I know I couldn't have lived with myself if I had done anything else." Jason pressed a soft kiss to the top of her head. "You're brave, Elora, braver than I'll ever be." She smiled softly, though her heart still ached with the weight of everything she had lost. But as she stood there in Jason's arms, looking out at the city below, she knew that she had gained something far more important. Love, freedom. A future she had chosen for herself. And though the road ahead would be difficult, filled with uncertainty and danger, she knew that she wouldn't face it alone. She had Jason. And that was enough. The Lysandrian Council had spoken. Elora was exiled. But what was exile, truly, if it meant stepping into a future shaped by her own choices, her own desires? Elora stood on the observation deck of the Earth-Lysandrian Alliance ship, watching as the planet Lysandria shrank in the distance, a glittering orb of silver and green swallowed by the infinite black of space. Her heart ached, but the heaviness of regret was offset by something deeper, something powerful: liberation. She was no longer bound by the rigid laws that had governed her existence since birth, no longer confined by the expectations of a society that prized control over compassion, duty over desire. The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. Jason stood beside her, quiet, his presence a steady comfort. The silence between them was one of understanding. There was no need for words in this moment. They had both sacrificed much, but they had gained each other, and in the end, that was all that mattered. "Are you ready?" Jason asked softly, his voice breaking through the quiet. He turned toward her, his eyes full of the same warmth that had first drawn her to him, the same warmth that had awakened emotions she had spent a lifetime suppressing. Elora took a deep breath, her gaze still fixed on the distant stars. "I don't know if I'll ever truly be ready," she admitted, "but I know I can't go back, not now." Jason's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as he gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You won't have to. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." She looked up at him, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions: love, fear, hope. Together she repeated softly the word: a promise, a vow. Weeks passed in a blur of quiet conversations and tentative plans as Elora and Jason adjusted to their new reality. They had returned to Earth, where Jason's diplomatic connections provided a degree of protection, but the tension between Earth and Lysandria remained palpable. The fallout from Elora's exile had sent ripples through both worlds, and the repercussions were beginning to take shape. For the first time in her life, Elora was untethered, free to choose her own path, free to live without the constant pressure of duty weighing on her every decision. And yet, the uncertainty of her future loomed large, a shadow that lingered at the edges of her newfound freedom. It wasn't long before whispers of unrest began to reach their ears. Elora and Jason were seated in the bustling atrium of the Earth Interplanetary Council's headquarters, a sprawling complex of sleek glass and steel that served as the hub of Earth's diplomatic relations with other worlds. They had been called to a meeting with Senator Hartman, one of Jason's closest allies and a key player in Earth's dealings with Lysandria. The senator had been sympathetic to their situation, but the political landscape was shifting rapidly, and even he was wary of what was to come. As they waited, Elora couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in the way people looked at her. Once, she had been revered as a Lysandrian diplomat, respected, even feared for her poise and control. But now she was an outcast, a symbol of defiance, a cautionary tale whispered about in the corridors of power. The doors to the senator's office slid open, and Senator Hartman himself appeared, his brow furrowed in thought as he waved them inside. Jason, Elora, he greeted them, his tone warm but laced with concern. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Jason nodded. "We appreciate your willingness to meet with us, Senator." Hartman gestured for them to sit, and as they settled into the chairs across from his desk, his expression grew more serious. "I won't waste your time with pleasantries. The situation with Lysandria is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. Your exile, Elora, has caused significant unrest among the younger generation of Lysandrians." Elora's heart skipped a beat, her mind racing. Unrest. Hartman leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. There's been a growing movement within Lysandria, spurred by your defiance. They see you as a symbol of change, proof that the old ways no longer serve the people. Many of them are questioning the council's authority, and they're demanding reform. Jason exchanged a glance with Alora, his expression a mix of surprise and concern. A revolution, he asked. Hartman shook his head. Not quite. At least not yet, but the rumblings are there. The younger Lysandrians are dissatisfied with the strict emotional control their society imposes. They're inspired by what you did, Alora, by your willingness to choose love over duty. Alora felt a surge of conflicting emotions: pride, fear, uncertainty. She had never set out to become a symbol of rebellion. All she had wanted was the freedom to follow her heart, to be with Jason. But now it seemed that her actions had sparked something far larger than herself. I didn't mean to cause a revolution, Alora said softly, her voice laced with uncertainty. Hartman's gaze softened. I know, but sometimes change happens whether we intend it or not. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The days that followed were filled with difficult conversations and weighty decisions. Alora and Jason remained in close contact with Hartman and other allies within the Earth Interplanetary Council, trying to navigate the growing unrest on Lysandria from a distance. The Council of Elders, as expected, had responded to the growing dissent with harsh measures, cracking down on anyone who openly questioned their authority. But the movement continued to grow. Alora found herself in a strange position, both an outsider and a central figure in the unfolding events. Her name was spoken in hushed tones among the reformists on Lysandria, and messages of support began to trickle in from those who saw her as a beacon of hope. They looked to her for guidance, for leadership. But how could she lead when she had been cast out of the very society they sought to change? One evening, as she and Jason sat together in their small apartment overlooking the city, the weight of it all became too much to bear. I never wanted this, Alora whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I didn't want to be a symbol. I didn't want to be the cause of more conflict. Jason sat beside her, his hand resting gently on her back. I know, he said softly, but it's not just about us anymore. What you did, it opened people's eyes. They see that there's another way, that they don't have to live under the council's control forever. Alora looked up at him, her silver eyes filled with uncertainty. But what if I'm not the person they think I am? What if I'm not strong enough to lead them? Jason's expression softened and he reached for her hand, holding it firmly in his own. You are strong, Alora. Stronger than you know. You stood up to the council, knowing the risks. You chose love, knowing what it would cost you. That's the kind of strength people need right now. She closed her eyes, leaning into him as the weight of his words settled over her. He was right. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way to turn those consequences into something meaningful. Something that could change not just her life, but the lives of so many others. It wasn't long before the whispers of revolution on Lysandria turned into something far more tangible. Protests began to break out in the streets of the capital city, young Lysandrians demanding reform, demanding the right to feel, to love, to choose their own paths. The Council of Elders responded with force, but the movement only grew stronger, fueled by the courage of those who had been inspired by Alora's defiance. News of the unrest spread across the galaxy, and soon other worlds began to take notice. The Earth Interplanetary Council found themselves caught in the middle of a delicate diplomatic situation, trying to maintain their alliance with Lysandria, while also recognizing the growing demand for change. Alora and Jason watched from afar, unable to return to Lysandria, but deeply invested in the outcome of the movement. Messages continued to pour in from reformists on the planet, many of them asking for Alora's guidance, for her support. They wanted her to be their leader, to stand at the forefront of the revolution. One night, as she sat alone in their apartment, Alora made a decision. She couldn't stand by and watch from the sidelines any longer. She had to do something, anything, to help the people who were fighting for the freedom she had so desperately sought for herself. Weeks later, Alora stood on a stage in front of a crowd of thousands. The Lysandrian reformists had organized a massive rally on one of the neutral planets, and Alora had been asked to speak. Her heart raced as she looked out at the sea of faces, both Lysandrian and human, all of them waiting to hear her words. Jason stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone in this. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she stepped up to the microphone. My people, she began, her voice carrying across the crowd. I stand before you today as an exile, cast out from the world I once called home. But I am also one of you. I am Lysandrian, and I know the weight of the laws that have governed our lives for so long. I know the burden of suppressing our emotions, of denying our hearts in the name of duty. The crowd was silent, hanging on her every word. But I also know that we are capable of more. We are capable of love, of compassion, of living lives that are full and meaningful. And I believe that the time has come for us to stand up and demand that we be allowed to live those lives. The time has come for change. Cheers erupted from the crowd, their voices rising like a wave. Allura felt the surge of energy, the power of their collective will, and for the first time in her life she felt truly alive. She wasn't just defying the council anymore, she was leading her people toward a new future. As the crowd's cheers continued, Jason squeezed her hand, a silent message of pride and love. Together they had sparked a movement that would change the course of history. And though the road ahead would be long and difficult, Allura knew that she had made the right choice. She had chosen love, and in doing so, she had chosen a future, not just for herself, but for an entire generation of Lysandrians who were ready to break free of the chains that had bound them for so long. A new dawn was rising, and Allura was ready to lead her people into it.